Hey everyone, a big welcome to you, brought to you by our sponsor, RWG Publishing.
Today, we're going to peel back the curtain on a true modern business empire. We're going way beyond the headlines to really dig into the core strategies, the big wins, and the pivotal moments that defined Donald J. Trump's business career. And we're using Bill Vincent's book, Building an Empire, as our guide to explore the exact blueprint he used to turn his family's real estate company into a brand known all over the world.
All right, so here's our game plan. We're going to follow 5 key steps. First up, we'll start at the very beginning with how he learned the family business. Then we'll jump into his huge gamble, breaking into Manhattan. After that, we'll see how he built the Trump brand into a powerhouse. Next, we'll head to Atlantic City for some high-stakes action. And finally, we'll track how he took that empire global.
Okay, let's dive right in. Section 1, Learning the Family Business. You know, you can't really understand the skyscraper without looking at the foundation, right? And for Donald Trump, that foundation was built right alongside his father, Fred Trump, who was a real estate giant in his own right.
To really get this story, you have to understand the two Trumps, Fred and Donald. On one hand, you've got Fred. His approach was all about being steady, cautious, and practical. He built a fortune on affordable housing in places like Queens and Brooklyn, using government programs to keep risk low and profits consistent. He was a master of the slow and steady game. But his son, Donald, he was playing a different sport altogether. He learned the fundamentals from his dad for sure, but his eyes were always on the glittering prize, Manhattan. Where his father saw risk, Donald saw a world stage. He saw business as a kind of performance, and he was determined to be the star, using massive debt and an even bigger public profile to get there.
And this wasn't just about book smarts from Wharton, you know? He got his hands dirty. After graduating, he was right there on the front lines, collecting rents, dealing with tenants, learning the nuts and bolts of the business. And get this, his first big test wasn't even in New York. It was a failing apartment complex in Cincinnati called Swifton Village. It was hemorrhaging money, only 30% full. He jumped in, poured money into fixing it up, and marketed it like crazy. In a couple of years, it was 100% full, and they sold it for a nearly $7 million profit. It was a huge win. But you know, the biggest lesson he got from his dad wasn't about making money. It was about resilience. Fred taught him that in real estate, you get knocked down. The key is to always get back up.
So, with that solid foundation and a huge win under his belt, he was ready for the big leagues. This brings us to part 2, breaking into Manhattan. This was the first giant gamble, the place his own father thought was just too risky, the place he was determined to conquer. So you gotta ask yourself, how on earth do you make it in a city that's literally falling apart? Because we're not talking about the New York of today. The New York of the 1970s was grim. Crime was through the roof, the city was broke, and the vibe was just bleak. Most developers were running for the hills. But Trump, he saw something completely different. He saw a massive bargain.
And let me tell you, the deck was stacked against him. I mean, first you had the city's financial crisis. Then you had the Manhattan real estate scene itself, which was a total old boys club. And here comes this brash young guy from Queens. They basically laughed him out of the room. Plus, to play in Manhattan, you need cash, like serious cash. And with no track record there, the big banks just weren't interested.
So how did he break through that wall? With a strategy that was just, well, brilliant. It was like a 4-part chess move. First, he found the perfect target, the old, bankrupt Commodore Hotel. The building was a wreck, but its location next to Grand Central Station was pure gold. Second, he needed credibility, so he partnered with the Hyatt Corporation. That was the magic key that opened doors with lenders. Third, and this was the home run, he went to the city itself. He pitched the project as a symbol of New York's rebirth and landed an unheard of 40-year tax break. And finally, the transformation. He wrapped the old building in sleek glass, and in 1980, the Grand Hyatt opened. It was a massive success that helped change the whole neighborhood.
Okay, so the Grand Hyatt was a huge win. It put him on the map. But what came next? That changed everything. This brings us to part 3, building the Trump brand. He realized that the most valuable piece of real estate he could ever own was his own name.
So what does that even mean, the Trump brand? Well, it was all about strategically turning his name into a symbol. He wanted Trump to mean the absolute peak of luxury, of success, of big, bold vision. The idea was genius, really. You weren't just buying a condo, you were buying a piece of the dream. The brand itself became an asset, something he could sell just like a building.
And this quote right here from The Art of the Deal, it's the key that unlocks the whole thing. But when he talks about leverage, he's not just talking about borrowing money. Oh no. For him, leverage was media attention, leverage was fame, it was being the guy everyone was talking about. That gave him the power to shape deals his way.
He built this brand on 4 main pillars. First, he became a master of the media, feeding them stories to stay in the headlines. Second, his buildings had to shout success. Think of the shiny bronze glass Trump Tower. They were unignorable. Third, he courted celebrities to live in his buildings, because if Michael Jackson lived there, you knew it was the place to be. And finally, he figured out that controversy wasn't a bad thing. He knew that being talked about, good or bad, meant you were relevant. So with this powerful brand he'd built in Manhattan, he was ready to take it to a place that was all about risk. Welcome to Section 4, High Stakes in Atlantic City. This is where he rolls the dice, big time.
Just look at that number. $675 million. That's how much he raised, mostly with high-risk junk bonds, to build the Trump Taj Mahal. He called it the 8th wonder of the world. This wasn't just another project. This was a Hail Mary pass of a business deal.
So the Taj opens in 1990 with this huge, spectacular fanfare. But behind the scenes, the debt was just crushing. The casino couldn't make enough money to pay the interest, and just a year later, boom, the property filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Now, for almost anyone else, that's game over. Career done. But this is where that resilience his dad taught him kicked into high gear. Instead of folding, he went to the mat with the banks. He argued he was worth more to them running the place than on the street, and it worked. He restructured the debt, gave up some ownership, but he stayed in control. It was a brutal lesson, but it completely changed how he did business from then on.
Look, how he pulled himself out of that mess is a whole story in itself. It's really the heart of the book, Building an Empire. If you want the inside scoop on how he navigated that crisis and fought his way back, you've got to check it out. We've dropped the Amazon link right in the description below for you.
And that comeback, it directly leads us to our final section, expanding a global empire. That harsh lesson he learned in Atlantic City forced him to get smarter, and it led to a whole new business model that let him take the Trump brand worldwide with a lot less risk.
So check out this shift in strategy. The old Trump model was all about direct ownership. Buy the land, get the loans, build it, own it. Like Trump Tower. Super high risk, but also high reward. But the new Trump model, post-Atlantic City, was way different. It was all about licensing. Basically, other developers would put up all the money and take all the risk. And in exchange for a big fee, he'd let them put his famous name on their building. He went from being a real estate developer to being in the brand business.
And this new, low-risk model, it was like pouring gasoline on a fire. Suddenly, the Trump name was popping up everywhere. We're talking luxury hotels in Canada, golf courses in Dubai and Scotland, a tower in the Philippines. This strategy let him plant his flag all over the globe, something that would have been impossible with the old, high-risk model.
So when you boil it all down, what's the blueprint here? What does Bill Vincent's book really show us? It's this killer combination of 4 things: thinking way bigger than anyone else, mastering the media to control the story, turning your own brand into your most powerful weapon, and maybe most important of all, being incredibly resilient. Just flat out refusing to lose.
And that really brings us to the big final question, right? When you look back at everything, you realize the most important thing he ever built wasn't a skyscraper. It was his name. So what's the real lesson we can take away from an empire built not on a foundation of concrete, but on the massive, intangible power of a brand?
Well, that's our look into this incredible business journey. But honestly, we've only scratched the surface. To really get into the nitty-gritty of these strategies, you've got to grab a copy of Building an Empire. The link is waiting for you in the description. And a huge thank you to our sponsor, RWG Publishing, for making this possible. Thanks so much for listening to the Deep Dive Podcast.